Hey, folks, good evening, and welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where the veil between the known and the unknown is lifted one story at a time. I welcome you and all our listeners, including first time chat participants. I hope you find tonight's subjects and reports interesting. So, a park ranger wakes in Brujas Canyon after sharing the same dream as his roommate, both chased by a black bull that local lore says is a witch. Another ranger's friend steps from her tent along a desert river and meets a woman whose attack ends with cougar tracks and a warning whispered by tradition. Some predators wear borrowed skins. Far away beneath the redwoods, a hiker meets a toddler who speaks an unfamiliar word, then loses 11 minutes he can't account for, along with any trace of the boy or the man he thought was his father. What threads tie a witch bull, skinwalkers, and missing time together in America's most protected wildlands? Nights in the Smokies turns the forest mute, no wind, no insects, until a crouched black form with burning red eyes appears on a boulder in a heat shimmer. Something paces hikers down the trail. In Yellowstone, a woman in 19th century dress walks a snowed-in road at midnight, dry hair, no face. Near Gatlinburg, a man watches as a human-sized shadow collapses into a coyote shape and hops onto a log. These aren't stray campfire tales. They're consistent motives. Or motifs, red-eyed sentinels, liminal crossings, bridges, bends, boulder gates, and entities that compromise or compress time, distance, and time. Go west and the pattern persists. The half-dome hiker stares up at a white pant leg shape tucked in a cliff alcove, immobile in the high wind, echoing California's nightcrawler archetype. On Mount Lassen, a volcanic slope answers a teenager's call with a throat-deep roar a ranger will later name flatly Bigfoot. At Crater Lake, pale eyes and a gray, low-slung humanoid glide from the dark. At Cayuga, a winged figure with 10-foot spread and red eyes drops from a tree as a missing camper crawls from a bush. Why the red eyes? Why the silence before the approach? Why so often that water, switchbacks, bridges, and towers? Keep reading as we map these accounts against known hot zones: Brewhouse Canyon to Arches, Muir Woods to Yosemite, the Smokies to Yellowstone, Crater Lake to Cuyahoga, and test them against the three working models: a shapeshifter lore tracking real predatory intelligence along waterways, a guardian sentinel phenomena clustering at geological and energetic thresholds, and maybe a glimmer entity whose interference fields produce memory gaps and light suppression. The witnesses didn't just see things, they crossed into places where the land itself seems to watch back. But before I proceed, please consider supporting the channel by clicking the subscribe and like buttons and by sharing our content. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. You can also use the PayPal and buy me a coffee links in the description. Thanks for your support and your consideration. Your comments are always welcome. Please let the moderators or me know which accounts you find interesting in the presentation, or share any suggestions for upcoming shows. Now, if you're in the chat and have a question, please use all caps. I'll try to get to each one of them after my presentation. So in this first account, the witness states, "Hi, you asked for personal stories, so this is what we have to offer. My brother is a national park ranger. He had only one unusual experience in Big Bend National Park, located in Brewster County, Texas. He and his roommate had the same dream, in which they were chased through the mountains by a large black bull. Turns out the canyon he was staying in was haunted by a witch that takes the form of a bull. It's called Brewhouse Canyon. He says many unusual things happen in the Southwest, though, and his fellow rangers who have worked at the National Park Service for a while have some good stories. One season, he was working at Arches in Utah, and his fellow ranger, had taken a kayaking trip somewhere in that area. One night, while sleeping by the banks of the river, he had a very vivid dream of something walking in the water outside her tent. She went outside to check, and there was a naked woman in the river. The woman then jumped on his friend and started choking her so violently that she woke up. She was still seriously gasping for breath. The next morning, she checked outside her tent, and there were cougar tracks everywhere. She talked to a native friend about this, and it turned out skinwalkers were turning into cougars and hang out in that section of the river. Apparently, she's lucky to be alive. My brother said the fear of skinwalkers is so intense in these native communities that when he visits schools to give talks, he must refrain from talking about certain animals, owls and cougars, apparently. He also said there are quite a few National Park Service rangers who believe in Bigfoot. Not that he's a real ape, but some type of forest spirit. So his next account, the witness states, "Here's my experience from 2018. I traveled to San Francisco with my wife, who grew up in the city. On August 19th, we drove to Muir Woods National Monument with my wife's sister and her husband. This park features an old-growth redwood forest nourished by the waters of the Redwood Creek. I had volunteered as a youth sports coach for about 25 years, so I was very comfortable around children of all ages. We arrived at the park about 9 a.m. It was a beautiful day. The weather was fair, and the trail was pleasantly cool. My wife and sister-in-law decided to wear sweatshirts on our hike on the Muir Woods Trail, a relatively short loop just under a mile and a half long. I ventured off onto the Bootjack Trail Loop, which adds another 5 miles to the Lower Woods Trail, winding deeper into the mountain forest. I told the others I'd meet them at the parking lot after completing the extra loop. With my phone and digital camera in hand, I took pictures of everything that caught my interest. I encountered only a handful of other hikers on this segment of the trail. Now, as I neared what I believed to be the top of the mountain, I came across a child standing alone on the trail. The boy appeared to be around 2 years old and seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. I was shocked and came to a sudden halt. He was about 10 yards away and didn't look scared or startled. He simply stood there. I quickly scanned the immediate area for any adults belonging to this child, but found none. We were completely alone. While I felt bewildered, I also felt torn. Part of me wanted to pick up the child, but the other part was terrified to do so. I began to talk to the child, asking, "Are you okay? Where are your mom and dad?" The child responded with a single word that I didn't recognize and kept repeating it. I thought he might have been saying Papa, but that wasn't it. It sounded more like he was calling me by that name. I tried to figure out where he might belong or where he may have come from. I noticed what appeared to be a game trail in the ground cover below me, leading up the steep hill to my left. The incline seemed almost impossible for a child that age to have navigated, but the area above appeared open. So I climbed up to investigate and saw what looked like a campsite roughly 30 to 50 yards away. A man was packing items into his car. Now, at this point, things became blurry in my memory. I would have never left a child alone or with a stranger unless I was sure that they belonged together. Yet, after this moment, all I remember is getting back on the trail and feeling as though I had just dodged a bullet. I walked around 100 yards past where the encounter occurred, and it struck me just how strange the whole situation was. I turned around to return to the campsite to figure things out and noticed other people milling around the campsites. However, the campsite where the man had been was now empty. No child, no man, and no car. I felt a sudden urgency, realizing that I had been gone for a while and my wife might just start worrying about me, so I hurried back down the trail. I felt a strong need to return as soon as possible. Now, in retrospect, there was a few things I can't explain. I don't remember trying to use my phone. Maybe I didn't have service. I also can't understand why I didn't use my camera, which was in my hand. I can't remember what the child looked like or what the father did. I don't recall delivering the child to the person I thought was the parent or having any verbal interaction with them. I tend to be overprotective, so I can't imagine I would have confronted this man about his negligence. Now, looking back at my phone, I found 8 photos taken between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. On my digital camera, I have pictures of various trees and scenery from the trail taken from 9:30 to the trailhead. Using Google Earth, I can see that I took a photo at 11:37 a.m., approximately 100 yards before I encountered the child. And then another one at 11:48 a.m., 11 minutes later, about 150 yards past that spot where I met him. This means I can't remember roughly 11 minutes of the time I spent with the child in the forest. Now, I share this experience because I feel it holds some significance. I am curious to know if anyone else has had a similar experience. I want to emphasize that after the incident, I do not feel that I saved the lost child in the forest. Instead, I feel like I somehow escaped. Weird story. Now, back in 2012, 2 friends and I, let's call them D and J, visited Look Rock, a concrete observation tower at the top of Chilhowie Mountain in Blount County, Tennessee. To reach the tower, you park in a small pull-off area and walk a half-mile paved trail up the mountain. I had been to this tower many times before, and there was usually some energy in the air. You can't see it, but you can feel it, and it's as if the woods itself have acquired a form of sentience or barely tolerating your presence. However, the trip was eerily quiet. Usually, the woods are filled with sounds like cicadas, the rustling of the wind in the trees, and the occasional animal noise, but on that night, there was complete silence. To continue with my earlier simile, it felt as though the sentient woods were terrified of something and were paralyzed with fear. The hike up the mountain was uneventful, apart from the overall sense of creepiness. Now, once we reached the tower, we sat there talking for a couple of hours. Finally, around 3 a.m., we decided it was time to head back down. Now, at the base of the tower, there was a couple of flattish boulders about 6 foot in diameter, which served as decoration. What I saw on one of the boulders marked the beginning of a terrifying night. No one else in my group noticed it, but perched on the boulder was a solid black form about 4 to 5 foot tall with intense glowing red eyes. It stared at us for a moment before vanishing into thin air. As I assumed my eyes were playing tricks on me, I reluctantly continued past the boulders. A feeling of uneasiness lingered with us until we reached about the halfway point on the trail. There's a spot where the path turns 90 degrees to the right when heading back down. Now, while the trail we were walking on continues straight ahead, it serves as an ATV access for rangers in the Smoky Mountain National Park. About 20 feet or so before the turn, I noticed an extra pair of footsteps. There were only three of us, but there were four set of footprints. I stopped and looked, and right behind Jay was a 7 foot tall heat distortion like what you see over the flaming grill on a hot summer day. It was vaguely human shaped. Like the figure on the boulder, it vanished for a few seconds of staring at it. Now, at that point, we quickly made our way back to the car. J and D hadn't seen it, but they could feel something was off. Now, halfway down the trail, there's an area where one tree had fallen into the split trunk of another tree, forming a kind of a triangle against the ground. At the top of the triangle, I saw the exact crouched black figure with deep red eyes. Again, it vanished after I looked at it. We finally made it back to the truck, our instincts screaming, "Run!" We sped down Foothills Parkway until we reached the highway. From that point on, the trip was uneventful. Now, after dropping Jay off at his house, we drove to Dee's place, which was about 15 minutes away. Now, as I was pulling out of Dee's driveway, his phone rang. He answered it and turned pale and flagged me down. Something had happened to Jay's house. We rushed back to Jay's, where we found every light in his house on. Instead, we discovered him in bed, clutching a Bible in one hand and a 45 in the other. Jay's bedroom faces a street light, and inside he had a night light, a clock, and a stereo, all which kept his room well lit. He had gone to bed, but suddenly the room went dark. He could still see the street light, the clock, and the stereo. They were all on, but they cast no glow into the room. They were all on, but they cast no glow into the room. He said he couldn't even see the hand in front of his face. He also mentioned that something had put its hand on his throat and growled in his face before leaving. Now, by the time we arrived, whatever it was had already gone. Just to be safe, we lined the doors and windows with salt. I had read somewhere that salt could ward off unwanted entities. We never saw or heard from that thing again, and to this day, I have no idea what it was. We've gone back to the tower several times since, but it's never been the same. The woods have always felt quiet and fearful. Now, this next witness states, my story goes back to 1975. My girlfriend and I were driving back to Idaho, where I was attending school. We were headed towards Yellowstone Park and the East Gates in Montana, driving a little yellow Volkswagen. It was around midnight and the snow was falling lightly. Picture a 2-lane road flanked by tall trees with no moonlight, just our headlights illuminating the falling snow. Suddenly, I saw a figure walking right into the center of the road, moving in the same direction as us. It was a woman, and I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Do you see what I see? A girl is walking out there at midnight. It's probably about 30 degrees out." So we got closer. I can make out more details. I was about to roll down my window and ask if she needed help when we noticed her clothing. She was wearing what looked like an ancient 19th century garments, complete with hobnail boots. She had a long shawl draped over her shoulders, and her long brown hair hung down a little below her shoulder blades. The closer we approached, the more peculiar it became. Her hair was very dry, which was unusual for someone out in the snow. I was just about to roll down my window when my girlfriend urged, "Don't stop. Don't even look. Just go." That freaked me out because I was ready to slow down. Then she added, "Don't even look in the mirror." She has no face. I immediately drove away. You can imagine the scene. There we were, creeping along on a little Volkswagen, and I swerved to the right to avoid hitting her. After that, we reached the gate, but the ranger told us, sorry, the pass is closed tonight due to the snow. I asked, so do we have to go back? He replied, well, there's a little motel about half a mile back. We were terrified. Eventually, we arrived at the motel, and fortunately, the clerk had a room available. As soon as we got into the room, we locked the door and wedged a chair in front of it. The rest of the night, we couldn't sleep. Now, was that figure an apparition or an actual corporeal being? Good question. I have no idea what they ran into. Probably a time slip, though, most likely. So this next witness states, my fiance and I took a 3-day trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where we spent our days hiking and enjoying the national park. On the last night, around midnight, wanting to make the most of our time in the mountains, we decided to drive an hour from our hotel to a lookout spot at the top of the mountain. We hoped to catch a glimpse of the stars, as Gatlinburg had significant light pollution at night. As we drove up, neither of us noticed anything unusual except for the eerie feeling of the mountain winds at night. We're from Florida, so that was unfamiliar territory. Once we arrived, we got out of the car, and I was suddenly overwhelmed by a cold, oppressive feeling. Not wanting to scare my fiance, I tried to stay composed. The wind was howling, and unfortunately, we couldn't see any stars due to the cloud cover. I told her I was going to step aside to use the restroom, and then we could head back to the hotel. As I walked about 10 feet away, I suddenly felt an intense sense of vulnerability and detachment, as if I were miles away from anyone, even though I was just a few feet from my fiance. I turned to head back to the car when I heard something off to my right. I quickly looked over and saw something roughly human-sized that transformed into a coyote-sized creature, which then hopped over a log about 200 feet away. Mortal Clown, thanks for the donation. Much appreciated. I hurried back to the car, and my fiance looked at me quizzically. I was trying to hide my fear, but she could sense that something was amiss. We jumped into the car and sped away. Never in my life have I had an experience like that. I've never felt so uncomfortable being outdoors before. I truly believe something inexplicable was in those woods with us that night. Now, in this next account, the witness states, in the late summer of 2022, I had an opportunity to hike Half Dome in Yosemite. Near the end of my hike, I experienced this rather strange encounter. Now, while descending the John Muir Trail about 6 p.m., it was still light out. Just after crossing the Vernal Falls Bridge, I had a clear view of a massive granite cliffs from Washburn Point. It was then that I noticed an unusual object nestled in an alcove about halfway up the 1,000-foot tall cliffside. The object was a bright white color, whiter than any of the natural patterns in the rock, and I resembled two big billy pant legs like MC Hammer pants, connected at the top where the legs came together. Interestingly, the object didn't appear to be made of any sort of fabric, as it didn't move or ripple in the high winds, something you would expect from a piece of fabric. It's also worth noting that this was September, so there was no snow on the mountainside. Now, while I was quite far away, I could estimate the height to be around 7 or 8 foot. I paused my descent to stare at the object when another hiker passed by and stopped to chat. I asked her if she saw that thing up on the cliffside, and immediately she pointed at the white object and said, yeah, that thing that looks like the kid in a white bath towel. I was wondering if you were looking at that when I saw you stop. Now, mind you, the mountain we were looking at is enormous. It fills your entire field of view from where we were standing. Yet, she knew exactly what I was referring to even before I'd even said anything. She described it as a child in a towel, which I suspect was because the gap between the white pant legs made it look like a white object wrapped around a dark object. The dark surface matched the color of the recessed alcove in the cliff. I asked her if she had ever heard of the Fresno night walker or night crawler, which she hadn't. As I explained to her what they looked like, she started staring at the object from the cliffside and declared, "That's exactly what I'm looking at." I continued to pause and look back at it from different angles as we descended further down the trail. And each time the perspective shifted in a way that confirmed there was a solid object and no markings on the granite. I can't help but believe that it's some sort of strange foreign object that was placed up there, or perhaps an optical illusion created by the particularly stark white piece of granite. Now, the next witness states this incident occurred at Mount Lassen National Park in Northern California in 1973. I was camping there with 6 other boys, and we were spending the night at the volcano. As it started to get dark, one of the boys in our group said, "Hey, I'm going to go walk around." Since I didn't know who these other boys very well, I mean, only as friends in high school, I warned him, "That's not a good idea. You don't want to wander off out there. There's a lot of timber and it's pitch black. You could literally walk off a cliff and die." Regardless, the kid went off on his own. We had a fire going. It was just starting to get dark. I told the other guys, somebody needs to go out and get him. He's going to get hurt. No one moved or said anything. I sat there waiting for someone to go after him. But when it came clear no one was going to, I decided to try and find him myself. I took off down the trail, yelling his name, but there was no response. Then suddenly I heard a scream, an enormous guttural scream from a huge animal. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't just a single yell, it was hard to describe. The strange part was that I could see the animal. It was standing on the other side of a small gully, and the sound it made was low and deep, indicating it was a massive creature. Oddly enough, it sounded like it was right next to my ear, which was bizarre. As the scream echoed, I froze in my tracks, terrified. Just then, the kid I had been looking for came running past me, heading back to the campfire without saying a word. I turned and started running after him, filled with fear. I ran into another boy who had set out to help me on the trail. I yelled at him to run, telling him just run, and continued my sprint back. He looked at me skeptically and simply replied, "Yeah, right. You guys are just playing a game or something." Eventually, all 3 of us made it back to the campfire, where we sat together, frightened and anxious for the rest of the night. At first, I thought it could have been a man in a suit. So the next morning, I insisted we reach out to the Mount Lassen National Park Rangers. Being one of the older kids in the group, I took the lead. I approached the ranger and explained, someone was out there. They could have killed us to harm someone else. I described the creature's appearance and the scream. The ranger's expression turned serious. He stood up, walked closer to me, and whispered, "Young man, it was Bigfoot." That was the last time I ever went camping. So this next account, the witness states, "Hi, Lon. I've been reading your blog for months, having developed an interest in cryptids and the supernatural. I currently live near Portland, Oregon. Recently, I was talking to a neighbor about a strange encounter I had while working at Crater Lake National Park back in the late 1980s. The man was clearing brush and repairing a trail. One evening, soon after he clocked out, he realized he had forgotten his work bag, so he drove back to the work site. Now, as he walked along the trail where he had been working, he felt an unsettled presence, as if something was watching him. Now, at the time, he had no idea what it was, but he could tell it was there. And as he continued walking, he heard a strange singing sound emanating from the forest, reminiscent of a woman or a child. He described the sound as haunting and bizarre, and it seemed to be coming from the direction where he had been working, making him anxious about continuing. Ultimately, he decided to retrieve the bag the next day and turned back towards his truck. Now, while walking back, he heard footsteps in the distance behind him. And when he turned around, he saw no one, so he quickened his pace. However, he soon realized that the footsteps were keeping pace with him. When he stopped, he suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of danger and began to run back to the truck. Just before reaching his truck, he turned around. He was startled to see two bluish colored eyes watching him through the darkness. He felt there was evil in those eyes, and as he observed, the rest of the creature gradually came into view. He described it as a humanoid in appearance and pale gray in color, moving low to the ground. He was transfixed and paralyzed by the sight as it crept closer, its head having an alien like appearance. It then stopped and stared at him without blinking before quickly disappearing into the underbrush. Now, after standing there in shock for a minute or two, he managed to move. Intrigued by what he had witnessed, he stepped forward to search for the being and looked around for about 30 minutes, but he couldn't find anything. There was no sign of it at all, and he eventually gave up his search and headed back to his truck. Upon returning to the area where he had first heard the singing, he noticed tracks that resembled very large dog prints, but there were only 4 toes on each print instead of the 5 that you would expect from a normal dog. After examining the tracks for a few minutes, he experienced a strange sensation. His mind went blank, and he couldn't remember why he was there and what had happened. Feeling uneasy, he decided to leave the area and head home. The next day, while at work, his boss radioed him and asked if he had seen anything unusual in that area, as another worker had reported witnessing something strange. He confirmed that he had seen a humanoid creature with gray skin and evil eyes. However, his boss was dismissive and attempted to explain it away. Together, they went to the area to look for the tracks. Once they arrived and began looking around, he again experienced a mental blackout. When he looked up from the tracks, his boss was missing. He glanced at his watch and realized that over 2 hours had passed. It was now mid-afternoon, and he couldn't remember what had happened during that time. This realization terrified him. He walked back to the parking lot, relieved to find his truck still there. He got in and immediately returned to the main station where he found his boss sitting at his desk. When he asked what had happened, the boss looked up as if nothing had occurred and casually asked how his day was going, seeming oblivious to the earlier encounter. That was the last day working at Crater Lake. He realized he had encountered an otherworldly entity and wanted nothing to do with it. In the many years since that incident, he has never experienced anything out of the ordinary, but he stays far away from Crater Lake and never plans to return to the park. I got a lot of accounts out of Crater Lake, mostly Bigfoot, but there's a lot going on there. Now, the next witness account, he states, this incident occurred in 2004 when I was working as a park ranger at Cuyahoga Valley National Park in north central Ohio. Having grown up on the West Coast, I knew very little about Ohio. I volunteered for the 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift when it was available since I was a night owl at the time. So one night around 3 a.m., I received an alert from one of the campsites reporting that they couldn't find their friend. Now, that part of the campground was situated in a small peninsula with coves and winding paths that made it easy to get turned around while walking at night. This kind of situation happened often. Upon arriving, I noticed the friends seemed more scared than usual. They claimed that they had been searching for an hour with no sign of their friend. All of them appeared to be between 18 to 20 years old and smelled of alcohol. I decided not to call law enforcement right away since a drunk person often ended up falling asleep in someone else's chair at our picnic table, so we usually managed to find them soon enough. The missing friend had been sleeping in a tent by himself while the others were still gathered around the fire. They mentioned that around 2 a.m. they heard him rustling in his tent. When they went over to help him, he had walked into the nearby trees to relieve himself but didn't come back. There shouldn't have been much area for him to get lost in. We kept calling his cell phone. It rang, but there was no answer. Concerned about the possibility of him being in the water, I decided to follow the footprints in the mud, assuming they were his. The footprints stopped abruptly, well before reaching the water, still within the trees. I looked around and noticed that he couldn't have jumped anywhere. as most of the surrounding trees were too large to climb. The footprints simply ended without any sign of him going back. It was a bit strange. We continued the search until about 4 a.m. and then called it off. I suggested we wait until morning, assuming he had fallen asleep somewhere out of sight, so the group decided to return to their tents and try to get some sleep. I, on the other hand, felt too wired to go home, so I decided to continue my search. I wanted to sit by the water and stay alert in case I noticed something unusual. As I made my way back to the water, I noticed two things dangling from a tree up ahead. Now, when I approached to see more clearly, I felt a wave of panic. They were feet, but they weren't human feet. I gasped and instinctively began to back away. Suddenly, a creature swooped down from a tree like a bat out of hell. All I could think was that it resembled some kind of gigantic vulture with a wingspan around 10 foot. It flew down to the water's edge, its massive leathery wings spread wide. It was at least as tall as me, and I'm 6 foot tall. The creature turned around and fixed its glowing red eyes on me. This all happened within seconds. I realized it wasn't any type of bird and didn't even seem to have a beak or a recognizable face. Just darkness surrounded those red glowing eyes. Feeling increasingly worried about the missing friend, I lost my composure and started yelling at the creature. It turned and ran along the shore until I could no longer see it. I was convinced we were about to find a dead body, but then I heard rustling in the bushes, and a half-naked person crawled out. It was the missing friend. Once he got his bearings, he explained that he had gone to the lake to wash himself, and the frightening winged creature had scared him half to death. He had been hiding under some bushes and eventually passed out. At that point, I felt as if it wasn't even in my right mind anymore. I took him back to the campsite and later returned to my office to check out. I couldn't process what had just happened. After that, I decided to switch to the day shift, which proved to be much better for me. Eventually, I left the park in 2008, moved back west, and now work in the state of California. So, folks, that was the last account. If you got any questions, please put them in caps and post it into the chat, and I'll see what I can answer. I also wanted to mention that we had the first book giveaway on Wednesday night, and we plan on doing that for the members. And if you have any questions about it, go ahead and ask Marla in the chat, and she'll direct you how to become a member. Okay, dagnammit. Any thoughts on why you should not whistle at night in the Appalachian Trail, especially in the Smoky Mountains? I have heard that many times from people. I've also heard it from relatives who live down there as well. I don't know. I think it has to do with the mountain spirits. There are a lot of stories about mountain spirits in the Appalachians, but particularly in Western North Carolina. Now, what the mountain spirits are, I mean, there are a lot of big black cats or black panthers that people believe are spirits. I've heard that from a lot of people who have seen them. I had read an account here from a gentleman from North Carolina in that area who had been seeing the same thing. For some, I guess some old wise tale that if you whistle at dark on the Appalachian Trail, you'll call the spirits out. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but I have heard it. Next question. Sir Wolf, crater impact sites. Crater Lake seems to have many strange occurrences, possibly due to meteor properties. I guess it's possible. There's a lot of Bigfoot activity around that lake. I've also heard tales of underwater lights and possibly craft coming out of the water at Crater Lake. It's just a lot of strange tales that come from there. I don't know if it has anything to do with any ancient meteorite crash or something to do with the crater itself. But I do get a lot of reports from that area. Paranormalism Net. Is there any truth to cryptid containment locations at national parks? Well, if there is, I don't know anything about it. Um, and I don't even know if they would call it cryptid containment. I don't even know if they do have something like that, what it would be. I can't tell. I mean, the whole phenomena of the national park uh, weird activity has maybe prompted something to that effect, but I have never heard about it. You may want to ask Steve Stockton. He may know something. Can Squatch, any truth to the stories of staircases to nowhere in national parks, or are that just creepy pasta fiction? No, that's actually happened. I have received photographs of those staircases in the middle of nowhere. It's funny because I've been told several times by park rangers and as well as people who are doing search and rescue, especially in Northern California where these things are seen. But there's no foundations around the area. There's no indication that there had been any habitation, but simply a regular staircase in the middle of the woods. And it has happened. It has been seen and documented many times. What it is, I don't know. Is it a time slip? Is it a portal? I have no idea. But yeah, that's true. Mortal Clown, any paranormal reports from the Caribbean? Other than mostly mermaid tales and something voodoo related, I will get. As far as cryptids go, now I did. Now today I posted some weird things from Cuba that Albert Rosales had sent to me a while back. Um, but that was just Cuba. Now there's other things that happen on the other islands. I mean, but mostly it's something to do with going out in the water as opposed to being on the ground. So, but no, I do have some. Maybe I'll do a Caribbean show at some point. Dagnammit, do you have any stories of feral people? Apparently, they have a purple hue to their skin. I've heard of the blue hue of the skin, but I've never heard anything about purple. Yeah, I did a feral show about a year and a half ago. I don't know if I've had many feral stories come into me since then. I'll look, but yeah, if you look back into the archive, there's some. I have one there for about feral people, especially in the Appalachians. Jose Sanchez, apart from countrysides and abandoned sites, have cryptids in general also been seen in larger cities, small towns? It's rare. I mean, that's what makes the whole Chicago thing very unusual. Um, Occasionally, there is an old story from back to the 1910s about a cryptid canine in Manhattan, and it was part of a police report, and it was actually in the newspaper as well. I have posted on the blog in the past. Maybe I'll put something together about urban urban cryptids, and I'll throw that one in there. But yeah, it's very unusual. Jose Sanchez, and are they more spotted on the West Coast than the East Coast? I would say, yeah, I really don't know which there's more of, but actually, I would say the Midwest and the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast. I haven't really heard much in the West Coast other than a Bigfoot every once in a while walking into Portland. I've had a couple of those, and but any of the big cities like Seattle or any other city, I haven't really heard much of anything about cryptids being in populated areas. Ken Squatch, any explanation for so many missing people in the national parks? No, I mean that's an enigma. If you think about it, are there portals somewhere? I doubt for the most part, that it's some cryptid or big animal taking them silently. Many times these people are right beside other people and they just suddenly disappear as if they walked into something where they can't get out. But I believe that, I mean, until we really understand what it is, I believe that may be something that may be an answer, but it's hard to tell. Why national parks? We have no idea. You know, this is something that's been going on and documented for quite a while, and it continues to happen. But I'll be honest, I think probably every national park has their own little cadre of stories. Sir Wolf, have you had reports of a metallic door sound in the woods, as in the 411 stories? Yeah, I have. I've had mostly out in the desert areas. Not so much in wooded areas or, in the east, but mostly in desert areas. Now, why that is, I don't know, but yeah, it's mostly in desert or dry areas. Jose Sanchez, low crawlers have been seen at beaches beside open fields, and they seem to be curious of children. They seem to be curious of humans, period. I did an account a while back about a couple in Pensacola who saw something come out of the bay, and I've also heard of crawlers coming out of fields and such, and being attracted to sound, not necessarily just children, but just human sound. Are they attracted to it? Yeah, I think they are. I mean, if you read my book, The Meme Humanoids, there's a lot of accounts in there where they seem to be attracted to humans for whatever reason. Licum, the spicy lizard. Any particular national park or terrain, forest area, desert area, tropical area that experience the most phenomena? I believe every one of them has something going on. I've heard it from all areas of the country, even in Canada. So now, why is there a connection? I don't know. Maybe there isn't a connection. Maybe just because it's a national forest. But it happens in state parks and state forests and other protected areas as well. Why that is, we don't know. Anything else, folks? Okay. Well, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. And if you donated, it's truly appreciated. Your support is what makes this possible. So please like, subscribe, share, and if you have any encounter report or any sighting report that you'd like to be considered on the Personal Report Show or posted on Phantoms of Monsters, feel free to forward to my email or go to the website. We've got a link there on the homepage where you can fill out a form, give your report, or send something directly to my email. If you haven't been on the website, check it out. We're also taking email addresses, starting to put together a newsletter. So, like I said, you go to phantomsofmonsters.com and check the links out. There's a lot of different things there, and we're definitely increasing some of the bells and whistles on the website. Just going to take some time. So, yeah. So again, until we meet again next Friday night, stay healthy, safe, have a great weekend, and good night.